I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that changed lives forever.
I'm Christin Lindley, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that changed lives forever. This is my friend Matt. How are you?
I'm good. It's so interesting to hear someone else say it.
Did you like that?
I did. It was very professional of you.
Podcasting is a visual medium, right? I've got my Matt outfit on.
Yes, you do.
I have my hoodie. I have my Johnny Cupcakes poster. I'm fully embracing the host. So what are we going to do today, Matt?
So we're now about a dozen episodes into the Life Shift podcast, and I've been having these amazing conversations with people about the pivotal moments that have changed their lives. And throughout most of the episodes, I've alluded to different things that have happened in my life. And I can't tell you how many messages I've received from friends of mine or other listeners saying, well, when are we going to hear your story?
Yeah, I think even I asked you that. Yeah.
You asked me early on, guest number one. So this is what we're going to do today. So Christin is going to kind of lead the conversation, and we'll see where we go. And I will share the host's story.
I love it. Yeah, I think when we were talking, I even said, you have quite a story. I know little bits and pieces of it. I was there for a tiny, small amount, kind of on the periphery. And I said, when you're ready to tell your story, let me know, because I'll interview you. So I'm excited. I hope I do a pretty good job. You've been doing great. But yeah, why don't you, I don't know where you want to start.
I don't know
But
either.
why don't you give us kind of a... That's okay. I mean, I didn't know where to start. Give us a background. Where do you want to start? Kind of pick and feel where you want to go.
Yeah. So, as everyone else hasn't, we want to make these conversations. And so I didn't really do a lot of planning or figuring out exactly what I wanted to share. But I feel that there are two main pivotal moments in my life that shifted my life drastically in different ways. And so I guess it starts at the first one and really kind of where I was and what was happening. So, I was living in Massachusetts. I was a young child and my parents were divorced. So I was regularly visiting my father. My mom had main custody of me. I would see my dad every Wednesday, which yesterday we were talking about you going and getting McDonald's for your son.
Yeah.
But I mentioned that every Wednesday I remember going to McDonald's with my dad, and that was a treat because that was part of the custody agreement, was the Wednesdays and every other weekend. And so I would regularly see him, and I kind of had this dual life happening.
When did your parents get divorced?
See, I don't know. What I remember about their divorce is really the day they signed the papers. And I remember being at the business park, wherever this was. I no idea. And I don't even know if this is true, but this is what I remember. And I must have been 5 or 6, maybe. And I just remember being outside, throwing my winter glove up in the air and catching it. Like that's all I remember of that. And I believe that was the day of like signing the divorce papers. But honestly, I don't really remember or have too many memories of my parents being together. I feel like I was always a product of the kind of dual family piece where I mostly lived with my mom, but I visited my dad regularly. I was part of that family, had my own bedroom and all that stuff there as well. So that was kind of what my life was looking like. But in 1989, I believe in May of 1989, my dad got a job opportunity in Georgia. And so we lived in Massachusetts. Okay. Obviously, I lived with my mom. And so he took the opportunity to go there. And I think he thought it was just going to be kind of a temporary thing and kind of get a leg up at his company. It was with the same company. They were, I think, operating a new department or something. And so he was down there in May of 1989. I went down, my first airplane flight. I got to help, set up and do all these things and explore Georgia, which is 1,000 times different than Massachusetts. And
Yeah, Georgia's very different from Massachusetts, I have to imagine.
yeah, two opposing accents as well, which is always interesting as an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
So he moved down there, and, I came back and was with my mom over the summer. And then my mom and her boyfriend at the time decided that they were going to go on a second annual motorcycle trip to Colorado. I think it was cross country, and it was with a bunch of other friends. These are, kind of upright Hondas. Wasn't like a Harley group, or it wasn't, like a crotch rocket, whatever we want to call them these days.
Yeah.
Just to paint that picture, they were more
like a cruiser.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like cruiser
Exactly.
bikers. Yeah.
So this was the second annual trip that they were going on. And for some reason, I just didn't want her to go. And I remember like fighting her and arguing with her as an 8-year-old, just like, no, I don't want you to go. I don't know why. I mean, it's just a selfish 8-year-old. I don't know what was happening in my mind, but I do vividly remember telling her I didn't want her to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so because she was going on this trip, which I believe was supposed to be maybe 2 weeks or something, it was a long-ish trip. And again, these are 8-year-olds' memories, so I don't really know how long it was supposed to be. But because of that, I would go down to visit my dad and kind of have a summer vacation in Georgia before school started and spend, I want to say maybe like close to a month there to, visit obviously the custody component, but also allow my mom to have some single mom time, so she was on the trip.
Absolutely.
I was with my dad having a great time in Georgia. We were planning to go to Disney and do all these things from Georgia. And I remember September 1st, which was Labor Day that year, 1989, I was at like the daycare or something. I don't know if it's called daycare. It must be summer camp type daycare. And my dad's boss's wife walked in. And I was confused because it was the middle of the afternoon. Normally my dad would pick me up at like 6, after work, whatever that was. And she was there. And I was like, what? And she like picked me up and basically took me back to my dad's office. And I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't really remember too much about that, but I remember walking in my dad's office and he closed the door and he just looked at me and he looked like devastation on his eyes. And he tells me that this is probably the worst thing he's ever had to say in words in his entire life.
Yeah.
And he basically told me that my mom had been in a single vehicle accident with her boyfriend. They were in Buffalo, New York, and hit an oil slick, and the bike went, and they went, and she was rushed to the hospital, and she ended up dying in the hospital. Multiple injuries and those kind of things that you would kind of expect from a motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
So that was that instant pivotal moment that changed an 8-year-old's mind in so many ways. I think that moment is the reason that the Life Shift podcast exists, because of the trajectory that it put me on.
It makes me teary because I'm a mom, I can't imagine. Sorry, give me 1 second. I can't imagine your dad having to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I feel for you, and yeah, that's hard.
Yeah. I honestly think, selfishly, I think that moment was harder for my dad than it was for me, because my dad was, in his 30s or something like that, and understood, right, what that meant. But as an 8-year
That
old,
impact.
I don't think you understand the finality of death, right? Most 8-year
Yeah.
olds.
Yeah.
So I think he remembers that moment far more vividly than I do. And maybe that's
Oh
part of,
gosh.
blocking trauma and such as a kid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I, you're poor. I mean, clearly I have sympathy for you because that's awful. Like, I cannot imagine being 8. We talked about when I was telling you my story, having like the rug pulled out from under you
Mm-hmm.
and having to do that at 8 years old. I mean, that it completely changes your life. Now you have to live somewhere else. You have to be with your other parent as your primary parent. You're going to a different school. I mean, that is awful and hard. And it had to have been bewildering to you. And then for your father, I mean, like, yes, they were divorced, but he had to have still had feelings towards your mother in terms of like, this is still the mother of my son. You know,
Right.
she's still someone that he cares about, even if they're divorced.
Correct.
Like, how? Oh, and now the two of you have to navigate this new relationship of father and son without your mom and grieving in that way. And that is, I mean, to say that's a life shift is such an underwhelming phrase
Yeah.
for it. You know, it's, man, that's awful. And it's nice to hear you say like this, I get it, like that is the moment that makes everything else come to fruition, and like this project that you're working on, because of course you would understand moments where people go into a completely different trajectory
Yeah.
and want to investigate that, because it's such a, it happens, it's life, and it's such an interesting, um amazing story.
It's interesting at 41 to look back at it, I think, and seeing what I did with it. Because as you point out, my life completely changed because I no longer was going to live in Massachusetts, right? I was no longer going to see any of my friends again that I had made. So now I got to move to a new state, new school, new friends. And Massachusetts had their terms for the school started later. So when my mom died on Labor Day, school starts in Massachusetts after Labor Day, but in Georgia it starts in like mid-August. So everything had already started. So you're that, first of all, you're the new student that comes into the class whose mom just died, who has a
Oh
Boston
my
accent,
gosh.
and all these pieces where you just like stand out when the only thing you want to do is to blend in. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't want to be, when you go through that as an adult, you don't want to talk to everyone about it. As an 8-year-old, I cannot imagine, Matt, I can't imagine going through that. I can't imagine trying to process that and just like on a day-to-day basis, because you don't have the communication tools at 8 to tell people, I am not comfortable talking about that. I am still grieving and I don't even know what that means because I'm 8.
but I mean, honestly, people that are our age don't have a
No.
lot of the communication tools to do it either, which is what I learned for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out what you mentioned because I think that shift from my father was just as drastic because, he did not have primary custody of me. He was living in another state. He wasn't prepared, right? Who can be
No.
prepared to take
Who could
on
be?
100% responsibility for a child and also help them through the grieving process while also grieving.
Yeah.
So I don't think we did a very good job of it. I will say that. I
Yeah.
will say that this was early. I mean, it was late 1989 into the 90s.
Yeah.
2022 is a lot different than 1990 is as it relates to open emotions or grieving or mental
Yeah.
health or any of those components.
Yeah, because I hear your story and I want to scream, like, I hope he immediately put you into therapy. But probably not, because people aren't talking about therapy on a day to day basis the way they are now. That's just not, and talking about your feelings and talking about how grief is complicated. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
my gosh.
With that, I think I was required to do like school counselor or something along those lines. Maybe not required, but it felt required. And at that point, you can't really do therapy until you're ready to do therapy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or you've at least processed enough to understand what you need to do. And just recently, I think or you sent it to me, or I sent it to you. There was a New York Times video,
Oh, yeah.
and it was, I don't know, was it Swedish? Maybe, I don't know what it was, but it was a documentary. It was like a 20-minute documentary about grief camp. And what I found so interesting about it is it was children, maybe 6 to 12, maybe at most, maybe
Mm-hmm.
6 to 10. And they went away to this summer camp, essentially, with people that had similar stories to them,
Yeah.
that they didn't feel
Other
like they
kids.
had to put on a face. They could be sad. They could talk about it with someone that understood. And the whole time that I watched this, Kristen, I was crying, because I was like, imagine if 8-year-old Matt was able to go to that summer camp. Where the heck would I be right now? Because
Yeah.
my grief journey was long for this. It was like 20 years it took me, I want to say. So I'm jealous of that grief camp, as morbid as it sounds.
No, I mean, be jealous of it and also be proud that it exists. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, people probably who went through similar things as you as kids came out of it going, this can't, there's something better than this. There's something better than I've had a parent or a sibling or a loved one die, and then I'm thrust back into society and expected to act like a normal kid.
Yeah.
The other thing that strikes me too, that is so different about your story than the stories that have been shared so far on the podcast that I've listened to is, you know, you were a kid. And when you're a kid, so much is out of your control. And now you're dealing with the loss of a parent, which is way beyond your control. And you have no say in how you want to process that or what you want to do and don't want to do. You still just have to follow all the adults' directions. And how just like, no wonder your grief process was so long. You couldn't make any decisions about anything. I mean, clearly you couldn't have changed the fact that your mom had this accident, this tragic accident, but you also couldn't make any decisions on how and when to process that or what resources to find, even if they were available to you. You're just having people make decisions for you because you're 8.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense, and it's awful, but it makes sense that it would take you so much longer to process and to go through that because you have no control. Whereas in all of these other stories that I've told and that your guests have told, they've been adults
Mm-hmm.
when things have happened, so they've been able to choose, which as much as they can, how they want to do things, what they want to do next.
It's interesting though, because I talked to my friend Marty, and his mom passed when he was 12, and
Hmm.
our stories are so different, even though we were both
Really?
children. And I think it stems from the fact that, and I don't want to word it like this way, but I'm going to, the only thing that changed in his life was that his mother died.
His
And
parents were still together?
his parents were still together. He didn't have to move. He
Mm,
lived in the same house, went to the same school, had the same support group around him. And
yeah.
so I think when I talked to him, I was like, I admire how you were able to go through the normal steps of what you needed to do. And I realized at that moment, what made my shift so big was not necessarily the fact that my mom died, but rather my mom died and then every snowball effect that came with it, because of the circumstances of my family.
Yeah. Your mom died and 50 other things happened
Right.
as a result.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't have, I mean, similar but not clearly. You didn't have one life shift happen. You had a whole bunch. Just
Yeah.
like I was saying, like it was like bam, 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 all in a row. You know, you had, dude, that was like a week of,
Yeah.
I mean, when did you have to move? Did your dad immediately take you home and pack up all your stuff and bring you back? Or how did that process? Do you even remember?
Yeah, I remember a little bit. I remember pieces of that week because, she died in another state. So there's a lot of, you have to get the body brought back, and then you got to plan the mass and the viewing and the burial and all these other things. And I remember flying back. I don't remember how quick it was. I remember flying back, and I remember my dad and I going into the house that I lived in with my mom and kind of tagging all the things that I wanted to keep or bring, which is a whole other story that most of it didn't make it to Georgia because my mom's family decided they were going to have a giant yard sale and sell all that stuff. So there's
Oh my
that.
gosh.
So a lot of like the comfort pieces that I wanted to bring with me did not make it. And I don't know if that had any impact necessarily, but I just remember that. But
Of course it did. Okay, stop right now because the fact that you remember it,
right.
yes, it had an impact.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But I remember my dad's mom had to take me to get, a suit and the thing. I remember going shopping for that, and we were having trouble. She liked to tell this story. I don't know if she liked to tell the story, but she would tell the story of when we had to go to the shoe store to get like dress shoes for this 8-year-old who never had to dress up in his life before. And the guy was giving all these options, and she was frazzled too because she was pretty much like best friends with my mom, so it was a lot.
Wow.
And they were like super close, and probably why I ended up being really close with her. But she used to tell the story that as this guy was bringing out all these different shoes, she just like blew up on him, and she was like, look, I don't care, this kid's mom just died and I just need a pair of shoes. And
Good for her.
she felt bad because she didn't mean to take it out on this guy, but it was like, none of this matters. None of it
Yeah.
matters right now.
Yeah.
If it has tassels or you put a penny in it.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. They need to fit and they need to be comfortable. End of story.
I remember that. I remember that prep. I remember the wake, which is the kind of the viewing. And I remember we didn't really have a mass. It was just in a funeral home. We had that, and that was super awkward for me. I don't know that anyone teaches you how to behave at one of those things when you're a child and the person that you talked to like a week ago is in the casket.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember in the middle of the priest or whoever was talking, I just walked up to the casket and just like stood there. And then like I started saying things and my dad got super uncomfortable, and it was just a very awkward situation. And I don't know that you're supposed to teach someone what to do or if that's okay, but it stands out as like, this 41-year-old person, like, what are you doing? I don't know. I remember that. And I remember the burial and all those moments, but everything in between is kind of just, I don't know what people were saying. I don't know what people were doing. I just remember the kind of those little pieces of that week before we went back. And then I just had to start the new life. It's like, okay, close that chapter, start third grade. I had the best teacher that I'll always remember. And I think it's just because it was at that pivotal moment in which she was kind of the caretaker for most of the day. Right. And yeah, so that was
And
quite
did
a
she know?
shift.
Did she know what had happened?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, I was in Georgia and I contacted her and we had breakfast together because she made such an impact. And she seemingly still remembered me. And I think it's mainly because, like, how often do you have that situation, right?
Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, as much as you can't be prepared for something like that. Period. It doesn't matter how your parents can plan for worst case scenario, which again, I'm a parent, so you're constantly thinking like worst case scenario, what's going to happen? You can't plan for that. There's no way. There's no preparing. There just isn't. But it sounds like post this tragedy, your grandma definitely was a big advocate for you, and so was your third grade teacher. And it sounds like your poor father, I mean, I feel for him so strongly. Like, it sounds like he was doing the best he could to keep everything together. And how is he supposed to know any better?
Right.
I like, part of me is like, why did he move you? And he should have kept you where you lived and kept you in the same, maybe not in the same house, but at the same school, so you at least could have had your friends. But how is he supposed to do that logistically? And B, is
Right.
how is he supposed to know that?
Right.
Like, oh,
You have to make quick decisions. And
oh yeah.
we talk about how we were both just doing the best that we could with what we knew how to do. And, we were
Yeah.
navigating this brand new world, and we made mistakes, and that's what
And that's
happens,
okay.
right? And
I mean,
we had the support of his mom, and my grandmother she was the sounding board, I'm sure, for him. I don't know for sure, but
oh
I'm
yeah.
guessing that he would call her regularly to be like, this happened, what do I do
What the
now?
hell? Yeah. Yeah. And where did she live? Was she in
She was in Massachusetts, yeah. And normally I would imagine that when I was with my dad, he would call my mom and she would be like, this is what you need to do when he's doing this, like whatever it
Yeah.
may be. So I'm sure that my grandmother was that sounding board for him. And for me, she jumped in full force. She was living in Massachusetts. Eventually she moved closer to us, probably, I want to say maybe 4 years later. She left everything behind
Yeah.
because she knew that my dad still needed some assistance in just helping me with a mother figure and having that
Yeah.
balance. So yeah, we bonded hardcore, and I think she became my mom in that sense. She became someone that I just looked to as that mother figure that I was going to get that motherly advice from. We were going to have a great time, and I think she felt exactly the same way. We were
Yeah.
like at times best friends talking about things that grandchildren and grandparents shouldn't talk about. We were at times, she was strict and laid down the law. And other times she was just that, the loving piece that I needed. But I do think that having that relationship created a comfort blanket for me to avoid the grief process. And looking back, I realize how much I changed from when my mom died to after.
Mhm.
So, like, for instance, when I was in second grade and my mom was still alive and I was living with her, I would get detentions all the time. I would get like C's in my grades. Like, I was smart, but I just didn't care. I just didn't do anything. Why?
Carefree.
Yeah, I was just a kid, and who cares? A C's good enough, like I didn't have to do anything. And after my mom died, I always needed that A plus. I always needed to be on
Mm.
time. I always needed to do something. And looking back, I realized I was just trying to prove to everyone else that I was okay, when it wasn't my responsibility to prove to people that I was fine.
Yeah.
So that a lot of that was like me covering up that grief portion and just like, I'll show you.
Right. Yeah, I'm fine. Clearly I'm fine because I'm making straight A's and I'm doing everything right. So of course I'm okay.
Yep.
Don't ask me questions. Don't crack below the surface. And this is just me putting my psychologist hat on, but I also wonder if part of it too was like, if I'm good, if I'm the best, if I don't cause any problems, nothing else bad will happen.
Yeah. Well, if I don't make my dad upset, he won't leave as well. And it was,
Oh,
and I, having talked to my dad over the years, he never would have
no.
wanted that pressure to be on me, that I felt that I needed to impress him. Of course, he wanted me to have good grades and go to college and do all these
R-
things like any
Right.
parent would want. But I put that on myself.
But of course you did, because you were 8 and something so unfathomable happened to you. So, of course, you made connections that made sense to you at 8. If I do this, no one's going to ask me questions. If I do this, no one's going to be bad at me. Because that is your body's defense mechanism protecting yourself from further harm when something, the greatest pain that you could feel at 8 happened to you. And it makes total sense. It makes total sense why you made the connections you made.
In that 20-year journey through grief, looking back at it as I was nearing the end of that grief journey, talking to, therapists, counselors, whatever one I was seeing at the time, I realized that, and she helped me realize this, that every decision that I had made up until that point, to be like 28 years old, I was making with the consciousness of that 8-year-old child, protecting
Yeah.
myself from that, and didn't allow myself to like grow up or to let that kid just be a kid and exist and not rule the rest of my life. Because I remember I would be afraid to do things because of the consequences of what would happen. And it's, as I went through therapy, to the point where she'd be like, so what? Like, are you going to die by doing that? And I'd be like, no. And she'd be like, then
No,
do it.
probably not.
Right? The 8-year-old is okay. Just do it. As long as you're not hurting someone else or you're not hurting yourself, do it. And
Yeah.
I would use the fact that my mom had died as a crutch. I would vividly just see that if something went wrong in my life, my immediate excuse would be that, well, my mom died when I was a kid. And it's like such an unhealthy thing, but I hadn't gone through that grief journey and I hadn't tackled it. And I just like, once I got out of it, I was like, I am never tackling grief like that ever again. It's exhausting.
Well, oh, it is. And I think it's like, there are things in life that genuinely hold us back. And that's okay. Your mom did die at a young age, and that is a huge detriment to your childhood and probably to your development. But at some point, we allow it to keep holding us back,
Mm-hmm.
because, like you said, we're not addressing the grief, or we're not addressing the elephant in the room. And I don't want to say it's easier
It
to
is
do it,
easier.
but in a way it is easier, because it is hard work identifying your shit
Mm-hmm.
and then saying, "Okay, this is my shit, and I'm going to figure out how to cope with it." That is hard, and sometimes it is easier to just hold on to it, to just keep it, to keep letting it hold you back, especially when it's that layered with everything else that happened on top of it because of it. And you were a kid, you had no control, you had no choice. I mean, I hear it in your voice that it's like, "Oh my god, it took me so long. It took me 20 years to get
Mm-hmm.
through it." And I'm like, "Of course it took you 20 years to get through. You were 8."
Yeah.
Like, I cannot imagine it not taking that much time, especially without the the hindsight that we have of 2022 now, where it's like, there's so many more resources out there. There's so many places to get out there and ask for help if and when this happens to kids nowadays. We didn't have that available that wasn't available to you and your family in 1989. It just wasn't. Like the
Mm-mm.
internet,
Right.
being able to get on Facebook and go, this has just happened. I need help. What the hell do I do?
Right.
Of course it took you so long. And also those are such formative years. You're 8, then you're a preteen, then you're an adolescent, you're a teenager. Like a normal childhood, there's so much going on and so much that you're learning about yourself and transitioning from kid to adolescent to adult. And then to have that extra weight of, and my primary parent is no longer with me, and I don't have that core support helping me go through these milestones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took you that long. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, and I'm thankful for that journey. I'm also frustrated that it happened at that time and that I didn't have
Yeah.
access to those things. But I mean, what do you do about that? Nothing. You learn from it, which
You learn from it.
kind of brings it to this next or the other kind of major pivotal moment in my life, which,
Yeah.
because my mom died, I became so close with my grandmother. She was, mom, grandma, best friend, just like the person I would call every day on the way home from wherever I was going or wherever I was coming from. And sometimes she resented that she was the call on the way home for everyone. But, it's like she was home, so it was easy to call her.
Yeah.
But because of that, we just created just such a strong bond. And, I would take her to concerts. In fact, that's part of like the little thing. She was obsessed with Josh Groban. Like she said that Josh Groban was her boyfriend. And
I remember that.
She had a poster of Josh Groban in her bathroom, which was weird because it was right by the toilet. So when you're going to the bathroom, you're also looking at Josh Groban. She also had a picture of him on her fridge. Like, everywhere. She loved Josh Groban. I mean, he's great. But like, put more pictures of me. Maybe not in the bathroom, but,
No, you don't. Let her have Josh Groban in the bathroom. I mean, it's grandma. She needs to have her intimate relationship with Josh Groban.
Yeah.
I would rather Josh Groban be in her bathroom than a picture of you. Yeah.
But she became obsessed with just like his talent and his songs, and just she would DVR every performance on every talk show. And it was her thing, and it brought her so much joy. And so over the years, we had gone to a couple concerts, and she loved it. You just see her face glow. Probably I think she went to like 4 or 5 concerts. And in about, I don't know what year it was, but she ended up getting a lung cancer diagnosis. And it was serious enough that we had to start thinking, okay, we do have limited time if the chemo doesn't work, or if, she had one of her lungs removed or part of it. I don't remember. I guess I'm blocking some of that out. But it was at one point when we got that diagnosis and I knew that my time was now limited. And so this is where you come in. I saw that Josh Groban was going to be playing at the TD Bank North Center in Boston. And I was like, we got to get VIP. She's got to meet him. We've got to get her in there. And unfortunately, I was unable to get the VIP, but for good reason. It was around the time of the Boston Marathon bombing, and he had invited the survivors of that as the full meet and greet. So there was no one else going. So that is okay. But I was able to get front row seats right there. Like, she was going to be like at her Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber type concert. Like, right? She's just so excited. Exactly. So I wanted to make something to wear to surprise her. So you helped me create a shirt that I actually wore to the concert.
Yes.
That says, "My grandmother loves Josh Groban more than she loves me."
Yeah, yeah. And then the back was like, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I did like a
It was so
hashtag
cute.
grandma loves Groban, and
Yeah, grandma loves Groban. Yep.
she felt like a celebrity that night. It was just like one of the best nights of our lives together, but I think also individually we had just such a great time. And I just loved being able to do that for her. And I felt like at that moment, that's when the roles started to reverse a little bit.
Yeah.
And, you know, I felt like that parental kind of taking care of her and finding the joys in the moments that were maybe fleeting. But thank you for helping me make that shirt. I still have it. And funny enough, the week after that concert, I met Josh Groban in Orlando and he signed it. And he's like, "You're the one with that shirt." Because people were tweeting the shirt.
Oh,
So it was really fun.
I love it. I love that. It turned out so cute. I remember when you came to me at my desk and you're like, "I think you can help me design something." And I think we came up with the hashtag ourselves too. We were just like, yeah, it was fun and it was so cute to see the pictures and I love that you met him afterwards.
Yeah.
So,
She was so mad that I met him the week after. She was so mad at
I
me.
can imagine.
She's
Wait,
like,
where was
"I'm
she
hanging up
living
now."
then?
She was back in New
Oh no.
England. Yeah. She was back in New England, and I went with a coworker down here, and she had like connections, and we were able to do like the meet and greet line. When I sent her the picture, I sent her the picture on like her internet system or whatever she was using at the time. And I was like, "Okay, I just sent you something. I'm on the phone with her. I need you to open it up." And she lost her mind. And then she's like, "I hate you. I don't want, I gotta go." It was so great.
That's a
But
great I mean, that's a great relationship to have with your
oh yeah.
grandma when you do something so
Mhm.
cool and then she's like, "I hate you."
Yeah.
Like, that's wonderful. That is a
Yeah.
great that's a
Yeah.
great
She
relationship.
was
That's
so
wonderful.
jealous. But yeah, so you know, that was a highlight of the last bit. But unfortunately, you know, things got worse, and we, you know, we tried to do all the things that we needed to do, and she had a fall or two, and then that's no good when you're, you know, in your
No.
80s. And so we had her 82nd birthday. Things were getting pretty rough. I was pretty certain that it was her last. And I didn't want to
Yeah.
be negative about it, but I was just like, she is not living the life that she would ever want to live. She's not on all these medications.
Yeah.
She's not the person that she would want to be. But we had a really wonderful birthday for her. It was just such a great time. And I was up there and, you know, trying to do everything we could to make sure everything that she wanted was there, because this could be the last. My whole family was able to come over and just kind of be there. And it was wonderful. But I remember, and everyone should be so lucky to have this moment in their life.
Mhm.
Sometime during that trip, I was, you know, just hanging out with her. She's sitting in her recliner, really can't do much and lots of pain. And we just had that final conversation. And we put everything out there. We thanked each other for just being who we were in each other's lives. And I honestly think there was nothing left that I ever needed to say to her that she needed to know, right? I felt I was devastated. I've never been so,
Yeah.
like, even when my mom died, even at that funeral and those kind of moments, like this moment that everyone should be so lucky to have, to sit there and just say everything that you would say in a eulogy, right? Say the things that
That you
matter,
should say to
right?
people. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just be like, "Look, if this is the last moment," I was convinced that after that conversation,
That was
she
it.
was going to pass away that night. Like I was convinced, because it just felt like that's it. What else do you need to do in life? What other conversation? And, you know, maybe selfishly, she should have had those conversations with everyone else too, and maybe she did. I don't
Right,
know,
right.
but I know for me, initiating that conversation is probably the best thing that I'll ever do in my life, because we were just so real and so raw and so sad and so happy and so many of those things, and like grateful that all the crap that happened in our lives happened because we were able to create this relationship. And had my mom not died, I don't know that I would have ever been as connected to her, my grandmother,
Right.
as I was. And so
Yeah.
looking back, it's like you can't be sad about the bad things that happen to you because they create
Right.
who you are in the future. And so we had that conversation, and I encourage anyone listening to, if someone is, or just if they're not, just have this conversation, share how you feel,
Have the conversations.
tell
Yeah.
people when you're upset, when you're sad, when you're happy, when people have changed your life. You know, these
Yeah.
things are so important. And I just never would have done that up until that point. And now I feel like I do it more, maybe not as much as I should.
Right.
But that was that one moment that I just needed. And I think it changed a lot. So after that, she got worse. And in June of 2015, we had to move her to hospice house, which was a whole other thing I learned about hospice. I don't know if you learned about it during your journey.
I actually my grandma went into hospice when I was a kid. And when I was in high school, I volunteered with hospice and created a Teens Helping Hospice volunteer
That's
program. So
amazing.
I'm incredibly familiar with hospice.
Well, I was not. And I was underwhelmed with portions of it. And I'll just put that out
Mm,
there. Hospice is amazing. Let me say that first.
hmm
However, my assumption was going into that if someone was getting hospice care, that it was all taken care of. And what I learned, at least in Massachusetts, is that that means a nurse will come once a day for an hour. Someone will stop do the grocery shopping, someone will do these little pieces, but otherwise the family is responsible for taking care of the person until the pain cannot be managed. And so we were fortunate enough in the fact that we could not get the pain managed at home. And I say that like terribly, but it allowed us to bring my grandmother to a space that was comfortable and quiet and loving and all these pieces. It allowed us to bring her to hospice house free of charge, to have essentially angels watching her.
All of that.
It was
Exactly.
so we got close to what we felt was the end, and I flew up from Florida to Massachusetts, and I stayed with her for her final 96 hours. It didn't My dad
Wow.
was like, "You didn't leave. You didn't want to." I was like, "No, I needed to be here." I say that last moment is devastatingly beautiful. And if you have anyone listening have the opportunity to be at someone you love side when they take that last breath, do it. It's terrible. It's so heartbreak shattering, all the things. It's so very sad, but you won't regret that you were there, because it's like I can't even just I can't put it into words besides being devastatingly beautiful. Like, just to see the peace after the struggle, right? And so that moment, I think, when my grandmother took her last breath, I feel like that was the next shift. Nothing else mattered anymore. And I say that in a way that, like, worry. Why do we waste worry? Why are we stressing about the things that we can't control? Just do it. Try it.
It makes, when you go through something like that, it makes everything, it makes you feel minuscule,
Mm-hmm.
so small, and it makes your problems seem that much smaller. It's like, why am I worried about this? Why am I pretending? Why just do the thing? Just
Yep.
have the conversation. Just if I am this person, then I'm going to be that person. If I need to do this thing, I'm going to do this thing. If this job is sucking out of my life, then I'm going to quit the job. I'm going to find something else to do. If my relationships aren't what I want them to be, I'm going to change them or I'm going to leave them. it is, Matt, it is wonderful for you that you had that moment with your grandmother, and what a gift to your grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
too. I mean, when my mom passed, and let me tell you, I've cried more in your in your story than I did in my own, I think, because I've processed mine. Um, when my mom passed, my dad was there with her, and he held her hand.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there because we didn't know she was that bad. You know, she was in the hospital. She had been getting better, which in hindsight, I'm like, I should have known because I with my experiences with hospice, a lot of terminal people will quote unquote seem to get better really quickly before they end up passing. You know, I think in the moment I had a lot of like hope that she was going to get better and come back home and be here for our wedding because we were planning a wedding, you know. And so she had started to get better over the last few days. And we had kind of been taking turns visiting her. And so my dad was there. And it was like all of a sudden she took a turn for the worse. And my dad just stayed there with her. He didn't call anyone. I think he even told me after the fact, like he put his phone in the truck. He didn't want anyone to call him. He didn't want to call anyone.
Yeah.
He wanted to have that moment with his wife, you know. And when he passed unexpectedly alone in a hotel room, and we think he passed away in his sleep. And I hope it was peaceful. You know, that's all I can hope for. For you to be there for your grandma had to have been so comforting for her, and what an amazing final gift to give to her. And yeah, for you, you take that moment and it is life changing, and it
Mm-hmm.
should be. And it makes, when you have a moment like that, it makes you recognize your bullshit,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
It really can help strip away the parts that you're allowing to keep you from doing things that you know you really should and want to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're strong about it, it gives you that momentum to say, okay, th- I, I'm going to let this change my life. I'm going to move forward in a different way. So kind of tell me about that. Like what was different? And, you know, now you're an adult now, so you can actually control things. What was different about this?
I kind of remember, well, we remember my grandmother towards the end when she knew that like she was not remembering things, the medicine was really taking over, and so was the pain. She told us, she said, I wish I hadn't worried so much because all that matters is love in the end. And I think about that, like when something stresses me out or gives me a little bit of anxiety, I'm like, does it matter? Does it matter? Should I try
Yeah.
this? Should I not? Make a decision and be okay with that. I think the first shift in my life helped me with this one because when my grandmother died, no lie, like after the funeral, I was a different person. I had the equipment to face grief like head first, like dive right in, get this grief over with so that you can celebrate the woman that was, right? And so I went back to Florida and I put in for a medical leave. I took 10 weeks off from work and I did my work. I jumped into grief and I don't know what I did, but I did it. And when it was done, I had clarity. I had gone through the process. I had gone through whatever stages that I needed to go through. Sure, I was sad, and I'm sad every once in a while, but those moments are so very small compared to all the fun moments that I remember. And so I'm thankful that I'm so angry about the 20 years of grief that I went through after my mom died
Yeah.
because they gave me the tools that I needed to process this one, which is seemingly harder because I knew her for 34 years, 35 years, 34 years. And losing someone that you're so very connected to, and watching them die, if we're
Yeah.
comparing here, in my opinion, is harder than knowing someone for 8 years, a couple years of which you remember, that dies suddenly. I mean, I don't wish either one on anyone, but
Right.
I guess if they had to happen in this order, I think I'm better because of it. And so that grief journey, I jumped right into it. And to your point, what you said a couple minutes ago is like, nothing really mattered. If things felt bad, I didn't do them. So there were a couple instances in which I had a job that just felt toxic, and I felt that I couldn't do it. It wasn't good for my sanity, and it wasn't just, it wasn't healthy, and it didn't matter. At the end of the day, I was producing what needed to be produced, but I wasn't feeling the way that I should be feeling in that environment. And so I left it multiple times. I
Yeah.
moved to Colorado and lived in the mountains for a year and tried things that I wouldn't. Try learning to ski when you're in your 30s. Good luck with that for the first time, but like I tried it, knowing full well that if I ate it, it's going to be
You
a
might break a
long
leg.
journey
Yeah.
to fix that. To the point that I took lessons with a bunch of 8-year-olds, which was really annoying
Oh,
because
that's
they're just
fun.
like zip zooming down the hill because they're this far from the ground. And here I am, this old man going so slow because he knows what it's going to feel like when he falls or crashes into a tree. I just think it changed me. I think watching her pass and having that experience with her allowed me to get rid of most of the crap, right? And just focus on the things that I wanted to do. Certainly still have stress, certainly still have anxiety about things. However, when I'm in my right mind, I can process that a lot better, having gone through that first grief journey and then the second one. So I am thankful for these hard times.
I see two kind of differences between like your post events, after your mom passed and after your grandma passed. And it's a huge shift in the way you process things. And the first one that I see is, after your mom passed, you got very cautious about what you were doing. I've got to be this. I've got to be the best kid, the best student. I've got to follow all the rules. I've got to do all the things. And that's a very protective, it's kind of like a turtle.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting into your shell and protecting yourself because you don't want to be hurt again. Whereas post your grandma passing, it's screw what everyone else thinks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be true to who I am. That's how I can best represent myself and be myself. I I don't need other people to validate me. I don't need to be following everyone else's rules. I'm going to be true to who I am because at the end of the day, that's what's most
Mm-hmm.
important. My grandma died with no regrets or had some regrets about the worry. And I'm going to take that because I loved her and I care about her. And I'm going to learn from that. And I'm not going to say on my deathbed, I shouldn't have worried that much. I'm going to say, I did it.
Mm-hmm.
I did the things I was scared to do. I tried things. I am the person who I wanted to be. And that's wonderful. And what an amazing transition to be able to learn from and look back on and say, I protected myself when I needed to, and now I can be the person I want to be. And that's huge.
Yeah, I think, to build on that, I think that after my mom died, I was living my life for other people and for what their expectations were and for whatever society thought that you should do next, and whatever that's
Yeah.
being good in high school, to go to college and then go to get a graduate degree and then get a good job and then get promotions and all that stuff, right, that society's telling you to do. And I think when my grandmother died, when she took that last breath, it was like, I'm going to do whatever I want at this point, right? Because at the end of the day, this is how it could end. And I want to be laying here with people by my side that matter and can be there
Yeah.
for me, and we can be there for each other. And so, yeah, I think I went that first part of my life, I was living for other people, and now I'm living more authentically for myself, which, if we can learn from terrible situations and find the value in them, I'm thankful for these moments, as tough as that is to say, because they've created who
It
I am at
is.
this point. And it's allowed me to be open enough to have these conversations on this podcast, right? To be inquisitive enough to know that we all have these stories and they're so different, but yet the human experience is very similar. We're finding a lot of commonalities between what we're saying. So I'm thankful for it.
Yeah. I think too, like, in a way, it feels like your grandma passing and grieving her resolved some of the pain of your mom passing and like an unresolved grief from your mom. You know what I mean? Like, and grief is one of those things that y- you can't just be over it.
Right.
Like you don't ever, it's never gone because it's not. You're always going to have the loss of that person, right? But it's being able to accept that they're gone and accept the sadness. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sad that they're gone. That's okay. And not fighting against that and being able to be at the same time sad they're gone and happy that you had those experiences with them.
Yeah. It's processing, really. I think it's not getting over it. It's just processing everything and letting it all out there. And I still say it now to like all these people that I've been fortunate enough to talk to, is like, whatever you're feeling at whatever moment, that's fine.
That's okay.
And honor it and just live in it for whatever moment you need, and then move on to the next piece, right? Yeah.
When you're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's don't do it because someone else has said to do it or because someone else says it's time to do it. You're not on anyone's grief is not on a timetable. No one can tell you how long you should feel a certain feeling. It's just, you have to do it. You have to honor yourself. You have to value your own process. And everyone's process is going to be different, and it's going to be different at different times in your life because you're a different person.
I agree.
I think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful story, Matt, and I have cried. I did not expect to cry this much.
Well, I did not
It's
mean
wonderful.
to make you sad.
No. No. I'm not even sad about it. I'm emotional about
Yeah.
it. And sadness is part of it, but it's an appreciation of how connected people are and how connected they can be. I mean, that's why I love what you're doing with this podcast. And I love podcasts in general, just hearing other people's stories. Because, like, you and I were just talking the other day about Brene Brown's new Atlas of the Heart series. And one of the first things she says is, we're human. We are emotional creatures who sometimes think.
Mm-hmm.
We're not thinking creatures who occasionally have emotions, which is what we've been trying to pretend for years. We are emotional beings that occasionally think. And hearing your story and hearing other people's stories really just it reveals how close we really are, how connected we really are. The fact that your story is making me tear up is totally it's of course it is, because I can imagine what you were going through, and as much as I can feel what you were feeling, and I tap into that energy, and I care about you and I care about your family. I've never met your family, but hearing your story, it builds those connections and it makes us realize how close we really are. And I feel like it's so important. Like how we were talking, during my story, it's easy to feel like you're alone when you're going through stuff like this. It's easy to feel like I am the only person who has experienced this. I am the only person. I'm in an island of despair. And listening to people's stories reminds you, oh, I'm not alone. I have connectivity. And I think too, with you talking about the grief camp for kids, it's such a wonderful, magical thing, letting kids know you're not alone. Other people have gone through something similar, and you don't have to pretend. You can be yourself. You can go through it the way you need to go through it. And these people have gone through it too. And, they may not have answers for you, but you don't need answers. You just need to feel like you're not alone, and you can
Right.
process it the way that you process it. So, man, I'm going to go hug my kids now.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Well, we basically, you and I just went to grief camp on both of our episodes.
We
and
did.
I appreciate that you were willing to flip the script and be the first person to say, we need to do this. I didn't know coming into this what I was going to talk about. I mean, I understood what moments in my life, but I didn't know what was going to come out. And I think that's what I love about the Life Shift podcast, is that so many people after the fact are saying, after we had that conversation, I've been thinking a lot more about particular areas. Yeah. And you know what? If that's what's happening, I'm so happy, and I'm so thankful that people are listening. And I hope that they feel less alone through all of these stories. And I thank you, my friend, for being part of this episode and the first episode. Thanks for that.
You're so welcome. And thank you for allowing me to pull your story out and be the facilitator. I was super happy to do that for you. And yeah, Matt, you're doing such a great job. This is such a great project. And I think people are going to get a lot of meaning out of it. These stories are hard to tell, and being vulnerable is a really difficult thing to do. That's why that conversation you had with your grandma was such a important conversation to have, because you were vulnerable. And sometimes listening to other people be vulnerable can make you brave to be vulnerable yourself.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's something I'm really taking from hearing these stories is, be vulnerable, have those conversations, make those connections. So thank you for taking your time to share the story. I'm so glad to have this conversation with you, and I feel like I know you that much more, and I want to give you a hug.
Well, we'll have to virtual hug for now, but I appreciate you.
Virtual hug. Thanks, Matt.
I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that change lives forever. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information about how you can support the Life Shift podcast, please visit www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. See you next time.